You're listening to the Eye on New York podcast for Thursday, January 14th, 2021. I'm Robert Harding, the Citizen's Political Reporter, and this podcast is presented by The Citizen. Happy New Year. It's good to be back recording podcasts. This will be on a regular basis. I will release them every week. I actually planned to release one last week, but with everything that happened at the Capitol on January 6th, decided to hold off for a week, and I will touch on that in a little bit because if you've been paying attention to the news, there's been some. There was a big story this week. Obviously, President Trump was impeached, and one of those members of Congress who voted to impeach the president was Congressman John Katko, a Republican, who of course represents the 24th District here in Central New York, and he was one of 10 Republicans who broke with the party to vote for the president's impeachment. So I'll be talking about that in a little bit. I did want to kind of walk you through the plan for the podcast here in 2021. Obviously, last year I had this big plan. Let's do 2 podcasts a week, and for the most part, in the first few months of the year, I think we met that goal. We definitely had a lot of podcast episodes out there, but then COVID hits, and my plans changed, and I won't walk you through that 9-month period. But needless to say, it was a busy time, and you mix elections in with that, and it just became too hectic to try and fit a podcast even once a week into the picture. I did try after Labor Day because things appeared to be slowing down. Things appeared to be kind of continuing to be slow on the COVID front, but as we started to see in October and then right around Election Day, actually, it started to pick up again. So, still had to focus on the pandemic and the politics. And the podcast, the third P in the mix, had to take a break. But this is a new year, and I really want to make an effort to get the podcasts out. This is a bit unusual because I'm releasing this later in the day. Going forward, the podcast will be available at midnight on Thursday. I'm going to release it every Thursday. And we'll have interviews and lots to discuss, I'm sure. I am going to try and keep the intros to a minimum, so it might be 5 to 10 minutes or so, but instead of these kind of long spiels, cut that part down and focus more on the interview. So it should be a reasonably long it should be of reasonable length, the podcast. We're talking, I'm trying to aim, under an hour, of course, but maybe somewhere in that half hour to 45-minute range. Good enough for a workout, because I listen to podcasts when I work out, and usually I spend, about 30 or 45 minutes working out, so figured that would be a good time frame for people to listen. I do have 2 guests on today. These were separate interviews that I recorded back in December, and the goal was to kind of release one at the end of December and then the first part of January, but decided to save it for the first episode in January, both interviews, and then of course it gets pushed back because of what happened at the Capitol last week. The interviews that I did for this episode, first you'll hear from Dustin Czarny, an elections commissioner in Onondaga County. We talked about the 2020 elections from an election administrator's perspective. So there's a lot to unpack there. And then I talked to Roger Misso, who, of course, was a candidate on the Democratic side for the 24th congressional district seat. He did bow out of the race before the primary, but after he ended his run, he took a little bit of a break and then became executive director of the Taking the Hill PAC, which supports veterans running for office. And so we talk about that and the 2020 elections as well. And just a note, these interviews happened, of course, before all of the events of 2021 so far. So keep that in mind as you listen to them. But I did want to get those interviews out there because I think that there was a lot of good information covered in those discussions, and so you'll hear from them later in this episode. Before I get to that, I did want to address the big story of the week for us here in Central New York, the fact that Congressman Katko voted for impeachment. This is receiving a lot of attention still. I saw some stories about it today, but what I wanted to focus on for the purpose of this podcast is the politics of it, because certainly in this moment you look at the vote, and there are a lot of people that have opinions about the vote and an impeachment, but looking down the road to 2022 when Katko is next up for re-election, there could be some interesting dynamics at play here that are worth watching. After that vote, and even before it, really, the Conservative Party, State Conservative Party, put out a statement yesterday, Wednesday, about Katko's decision to support impeachment, and they were clearly disappointed. I think they even used ill-informed in their statement, which shows you how strongly they felt about the impeachment vote and in particular Katko's position. Keep in mind the Conservative Party has endorsed Katko in each of his 4 elections. So when he first ran in 2014, they endorsed him, and then in the 3 re-election bids in 2016, 18, and 20. Important endorsement for him, no doubt, and so if he were to lose that, that's a significant loss for him. Would it cost him an election? It depends on what happens with the Conservative Party line. If they run another candidate on that line, it most definitely could cost him the election. But if they don't run a candidate on that line, they just leave it blank, how many people would still come out and vote for him on the Republican line? But then, it's not enough with the Conservative Party. He's also facing some backlash from folks within his own party. I spoke to 2 Republican county chairs in the 24th District, Roberta Masserini, who's the chair of the Cayuga Committee, and then Fred Beardsley, who chairs the Oswego GOP. Both of them are disappointed with Katko's vote, so that's significant. We'll see what happens with that, because if the Republican committees decide not to endorse him, then really at that point it's up to Katko. Do you run in what likely will be a primary? He certainly would be in a strong position to run on his own merits, but certainly a candidate that runs in this district with the backing of other committees could beat him in a primary. Now, the X factor here, of course, is Onondaga County, and I haven't heard from the Onondaga County Republican chair, Benedict Duran, about this. Benedict Doran, I should say. She hasn't commented on whether or not, what her thoughts are about Katko's vote. She actually has worked on Katko's campaign, so she has strong ties to Katko. So can't imagine that she would be vocal, one way or the other about the vote, or at least, can't imagine she would say anything bad about it. But really, it comes down to how does the committee feel about it, and so that could be another story because I have heard that there are certainly some members of the committee who are upset with Katko. Now, whether or not again that leads to any sort of withdrawing support or whatever remains to be seen. We're still a ways off from the endorsement process for the 2022 elections. Right now, the local parties are really focused on the local elections this year in 2021 because petitioning isn't that far off. It's scheduled to begin in late February, and so they really have to get the ball rolling with endorsing local candidates. And so this might be something that they kind of push off and wait to address later, which could help CACO. That if you're him and you're worried about losing support from somewhere, then maybe some time away from this will cool people off, and they'll look at it with more on their mind than just the impeachment vote. But certainly this is a significant vote, and it's hard to forget something like this. And so the conservative committees in the district, the Republican committees in the district, we'll see what happens there. I expect that later this year, early 2022, we'll see how much this vote impacts CACO's standing with both of those parties. Because, just judging by social media, there's certainly a lot of people who have commented that they voted for CACO before, and because of his support for impeachment, they say that they're not going to vote for him again. Now, again, that's immediate reaction to this. Maybe if there's some cooling off, they change their minds, but it's also possible that they don't, that this stays with them, and that they don't forget about this vote. So, that's kind of like the primary process part of that whole discussion. Now, going into 2022, something to think about is that, CACO has really positioned himself well in this district. And before I even go further with that, important to note that this district is likely going to change, and could change significantly come next year. The redistricting process is really in its infancy right now. There haven't been any proposals drawn up or anything like that. Still waiting on the population numbers and the 2020 census. But it's possible that New York will lose as many as 2 congressional seats, which means that upstate, you're gonna see these districts, in all likelihood, many of the districts grow in terms of area, because they're going to need to fit more people into them. With CACO and that district, that could affect any sort of primary bid. If it becomes more of a Republican district, or at least the gap is closed between Democrats and Republicans, because Democrats have certainly added to their voter enrollment advantage over the last few years. Maybe that's something that Republican voters look at and say, well, maybe we back somebody else. Maybe CACO doesn't even run, even though he has said before, he wants to serve 12 years. He thinks he has two more terms in him that he wants to serve. So that's something to consider. If it becomes more Democratic, then you kind of look at the field and say, well, are you going to really run a conservative Republican in that district just to stick it to CACO, or are you going to go with CACO, who has shown that his kind of center right positioning, he really tries to position himself as a moderate, talks about his bipartisan work, bipartisan focus as a legislator, member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, all of these things, that could still play well in a district like that, and maybe he can still be successful even if there are more Democrats. But certainly that would be challenging for a more conservative Republican to win in a district like that. So that's a factor. But the district could also become, it could be changed in a bigger way, and you could see it become a red district, a lean Republican district, or a likely Republican district, depending on how they draw the map. And in that case, CACO could be more vulnerable in a primary. So redistricting is going to determine a lot with this, I think, because right now there's a lot of passion about the impeachment vote, but there's other things to consider for Republicans before they say either CACO's our guy, or no, we're going to support somebody else. So a lot of things to look at there, but just looking at kind of the big picture without knowing what the maps are going to look like, without knowing what the Republicans and conservatives are going to do. Look, CACO has had electoral success in this region. He's won 4 times. He's been a prodigious fundraiser. He could end up, the final numbers won't be out until I think February, but he could end up with $4 million raised in the 2020 election cycle. He raised nearly $3.9 million by almost the latter part of November. So, we'll see what the haul was for the latter part of the year. But that's a huge chunk of money, and he has shown over time that he can raise $3 or $4 million in an election cycle, and that's positioned him well for re-election in all of his campaigns. Plus, there's been some of these campaigns where he's been outspent, and he still has been victorious. So that gives you an idea of just how he's positioned himself in elections and how successful he's been. So, this isn't going to be an easy decision for Republicans, because really, you have to weigh these things. Is the anger over the impeachment vote, which, many do have, does that outweigh all of these other things? And it's going, it's a real tricky position for them to be in, because obviously CACO not only has this vote, but he's got a whole record to look at. Not only his political record, but his legislative record as a member of Congress. So it's not easy to push all that aside and say, this one vote, he's not our guy. And I think the same is true with the Conservative Party too. That's been a little bit more of a trickier relationship over the years because of how CACO has positioned himself, and so you never know what's going to happen there. They could endorse him again, or maybe they support a different candidate, or maybe they don't support a candidate at all. The conservative line could be blank in this congressional race. So a lot of different things that need to unfold there, but I don't think a lot of that will be resolved until at the earliest, maybe later this year. Certainly by the early part of next year, in 2022, we'll know where CACO stands with the Republican and conservative parties. But it's something worth watching, because if the Republicans, if there's a primary there, or if there's a conservative that emerges, there's a risk of a situation like what happened in the North Country years ago, when you had kind of a three-way split between the Republicans, conservative, and Democratic candidates, and that that allowed Democrats to sneak in there. But it's certainly going to be a test for the GOP, and for CACO himself, quite frankly. Does he have that strong enough base to withstand, from the right in this case, any sort of challenge? Whether it's in the committee phase or another time, or the primary. So yeah, that's something that we're going to be watching, and I'll close with this, just kind of my own analysis. I wasn't surprised that Kako decided to vote this way, just based on his comments days before. He held this press conference with the Central New York media, and he really had some strong takes on what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, and especially about President Trump's role in inciting that attack. He felt strongly that Trump was responsible for inciting it, and that that he had to take responsibility. And so when this possibility of impeachment came up, it seemed like it wasn't off the table. I know that Kako had said during that press conference that he felt that it was a moot point, because not so much of the act of impeaching or having some sort of penalty, but just the timing of it all. If you do impeach, then there's a trial in the Senate, and by the time that they impeached Trump, there was only a week left in his term. But I do think that part of the calculus here might be hoping that the Senate will convict Trump, because it certainly seems like it's not out of the question for that to happen. That's the next phase in this process. Now that Trump has been impeached, it does go over to the Senate. If he is convicted, he won't be eligible to run for president again. And for a lot of Republicans, that is an appealing possibility, because as much as Trump is an asset in a way to their electoral hopes, it also can, his presence can also be can have an adverse effect on their campaigns. You look at what happened in the midterms back in 2018, and Kako was one of the success stories, but look at the seats that Republicans lost that they had held for some time, that they were able to withstand these races back in 2012, and then of course they gained some. Obviously, they go back to 2010 when they had the red wave, and they continue to hold the House majority into 2012 and take the Senate majority in 2014, and then the Republicans hold both houses until 2018, when Democrats win the House. And I think from the perspective of Republicans, Trump might be helpful when he's on the ballot, but when he's not on the ballot, it was a disaster for them. It was not good, especially on the House side. So I think that that could certainly play into it as well. That there might be some political calculations being done, but also what happened on January 6th. There's certainly going to be a lot of members in the Senate who look at that and say, maybe we should convict here. It'll be interesting to see if they can reach that 2/3 threshold to convict. You're going to have 50 Democrats in the chamber. Let's assume that all of them vote. You're still going to need 17 Republicans to side with you. Are those votes there? I think that might be a stretch, but you can see why it's not out of the question, because of the comments made by Mitch McConnell about holding the trial, and some of the comments made by senators already who don't approve of what the president did, his role in that. So something to watch, and on top of all this, we have an inauguration coming up on Wednesday, January 20th, of course. Joe Biden takes office as the president. Kamala Harris will become the vice president. And so that swearing-in's happening at noon on Wednesday. And Trump, of course, leaves office. There were reports recently that he's going to leave on January 19th. So that's that. But yeah, the CATCO thing is going to be something to watch, and I'll certainly be talking about it a lot on this podcast. So with that, I'm going to get to the interviews. I'm going to wrap it up here. No outro. We'll just close with the interviews. You're first going to hear from Dustin Czarny, then followed by Roger Misso. Again, I'm going to release new podcasts every Thursday. They'll be available at midnight Thursday. So that's where you'll be able to hear. That's when you'll be able to hear the podcast. You'll be able to hear them on auburnpub.com, of course. You can listen there, or iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Omni, which is hosting the podcast. That's our hosting platform. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the interviews. I'm here with Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner in Onondaga County, a repeat guest on the IN New York podcast. Happy New Year to you, Dustin.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great. So let's start, with just kind of a general look back from an election commissioner's perspective. Certainly 2020 presented a lot of challenges for election boards, across the state, of course, but election commissioners, people in charge of elections across the country, really. Certainly the pandemic had an effect on everything, including election administration. So, I guess what's the... in terms of the state of elections where you are, how would you summarize the year?
Well, it was a challenging year, I guess is the best way to summarize it. Besides dealing with the pandemic, which turned everything upside down, we also had to absolutely change everything in the way of how we vote. We added in an expanded use of early voting. We added in an expanded use of absentee voting. We had to have more people to be able to clean and make in-person voting safe, but yet our traditional pool of inspectors were drying up because they are older and at risk and didn't want to work. And so we had to go recruit new inspectors and find a way to train them in the middle of a pandemic. And then, of course, we've had the moving elections. You had a presidential election that was moved and then canceled and then put back on, and special elections that were moved and then canceled. And it just created a perfect storm of problems. That being said, I think it also created some opportunities because we got to see where the holes are in New York elections and why we can't just switch to vote by mail. Because our entire system has been built around an in-person voting system, and we have to make changes to our laws to be able to really help the voters be able to do certain things like early voting and vote by mail. And these are things that the voters want and need. And so I do think it's been a challenging year, but there's been a lot of things that we can look at as things to build upon in the future.
When you talk about the holes, because I know, certainly just expanding absentee voting, it certainly produced some great turnout results, but I know from talking to you and other election commissioners that, that there were some challenges with that. So what are those holes that need to be filled in, to, I guess, continue that progress, so to speak?
So in New York, we're one of the few states that I think maybe the only state that allows people to vote in person if they've submitted an absentee. And then we pull that absentee after Election Day, which means that we cannot count absentee voters until at least 4 or 5 days after Election Day. And when we were thinking about this throughout the year, we thought, well, so what? We always count them after Election Day. They're usually not that many, and even if there is a lot of them, perhaps the public can be patient for election results, and that was our main worry is about getting election results out. But what we didn't realize, and I don't think we didn't realize how much leaving these absentee ballots till after Election Day opened them up to ridiculous and unsubstantiated challenges from outside parties. Because all of a sudden, instead of counting the votes and seeing what the results are, parties, and yes, on both sides, but we know where most of the challenges came from. They were trying to game the system. Instead of counting the votes and seeing what the results were, they were trying to make sure that legally cast votes from certain parties were not allowed, and by counting these absentee ballots after Election Day, it isn't just about waiting for results. It's about putting a target on these ballots' backs and in these voters' backs, and we really have to find a way to resolve that. And we see that still going on in New York 22. There's 500 challenged ballots out there, and we don't know what those ballots, they're in court right now over them. We don't know how the judges are going to rule, and there's only 20 or 30 votes separating the candidates. So having absentee ballots being counted after Election Day and having people be able to go to the polls on Election Day and take their absentee ballots back, isn't just creating a delay in results. It's creating a system in which these ballots are treated differently than any other ballots in person or early on Election Day or before. So it's really something that we have to address.
I did want to get your thoughts on the expanded absentee voting that we did see in 2020, and just the results that produced. More turnout, obviously, in the general election, the primary election as well. That's when we really first saw it. Even school budget and Board of Education votes. There was tremendous turnout for those, just given how those were administered as well. Those were all done by mail, I believe. So when you look at that, what lasting reforms do you think should be made to make it easier for voters to cast a ballot in an election?
Well, I have this old saying, it's not a real, if you make it easier for people to vote, they tend to. And, that's what seems to be happening here. When we started along this path of reforming New York elections in 2019, after the United Democratic, governance of the state, we kept saying, the advocates for reform kept saying that early voting isn't going to solve everything. You can't, not one thing is going to be a panacea that changes everything, but early voting, along with an expanded vote by mail, along with better options for registering to vote, along with, universal transfers of registrations, which allow people to move from county to county at the last minute and not have to get a court order. These are things that were passed in 2019 and expanded during the epidemic of 2020 that made it easier for people to vote. And despite a pandemic, despite efforts, limited resources by the boards of elections for, voter outreach and voter turnout, we saw record numbers of turnout, even compared to previous presidential years, even compared to what we thought was the daddy of all elections, the 2008 election that had huge turnout. We surpassed that. So, while there was a high interest in this election, and each election since 2016 has seen record turnout for that type of election, at least here in Onondaga County, I think these added options for voting definitely helped make it easier for people to vote and stay safer when they vote. So it did increase turnout. I don't think you can argue it didn't.
One of the big takeaways from not only this past year, I think, but past elections really is the need to properly fund elections in our state. I wondered what you think needs to be done, from a budgetary standpoint to really give, election administration and specifically county election boards, the necessary resources to not only carry out any reforms, but to just do the administration that's necessary, for a modern election.
Yeah, I think that's what that last part is what the most important part of this is that people forget how much work goes into elections nowadays. They think, when I first got this job, everybody said, "Oh, congratulations, you only have to work one day a year," and they don't understand, especially with the new calendar. The idea of the part-time elections commissioner is now should be a myth, and it should be done away with. All elections commissioners throughout New York State need to be full-time, and we see some of these counties in New York 22 and others that have part-time commissioners. They haven't been able to be as reactive and nimble in going and making sure things happen. And I actually know some part-time commissioners that are part-time, but they've worked 80 hours a week and they're basically getting paid $5 an hour, because their counties haven't grown with this. I've been an advocate for state funding, for New York State to have a better role in supporting elections. But I can't let counties off the hook either, because we are a function of county government, and I think a lot of times we're treated like bastard stepchildren, because the county executive or the county board of supervisors does not have direct control over the spending and does not have direct control over the hiring. They treat boards of elections as kind of we have to give them just enough money to survive, instead of treating us in the way that we should be treated, which is enough resources that will provide enough avenues for hundreds of thousands of voters to express their will in Onondaga County. So county boards or county governments need to step it up. State government needs to step it up. And we need to have a more standardized way of how we manage elections. Elections should be managed by counties because we have public officials in those counties that are, it's germane to that county. So you want to have a county board of elections that knows that county. But we can't just allow a different level of service from county to county to county based on budgets. We should have standard budgets based on number of voters that we have in our county. We should have numbers of staff based on the number of voters that we have in our county. And I think that's one of the main pushes that I'm making as chair of the Democratic Caucus of Commissioners and I believe our Republicans are going to come along with us on this, is that we need, more standard, more standard budgets across the state, so every citizen in every county gets the same level of basic service, and you're not seeing certain counties be able to do certain things and other counties not.
Let's talk New York 22 for a moment, because certainly that's getting a lot of attention. As we record this, it's December 31st, and there's no result in that race. It's still going through the court process. But looking at it from an election commissioner's perspective, we've heard some things about what's happened in that district with the election boards, the infamous stickies, some ballots that just turned up in a drawer, on a couple of occasions, I think. When you hear these things, what I guess simply put, what went wrong in New York 22? From looking at it from an outsider's perspective, since you're not in that district.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the, that's a challenge for me because I'm not there and I don't know what happened exactly. Obviously, it's really hard to defend things like ballots showing up in a drawer and the sticky note thing really, evolves from our antiquated challenge laws that envision challenges happening on the night of the election when inspector teams are opening up ballots at the polling places, which we don't do anymore. Yet we haven't updated our challenge laws to create a standard system. Look, when we were going through our challenges here in Onondaga County, we got lucky because we had a little bit of foresight to see all these challenges coming, and we redesigned our system here on the fly to have a better tracking of all these challenges. So again, part of the problem with New York 22 is there's 8 different counties. They're all very small counties with very small amounts of resources. They've all been overwhelmed all year long. And then you have a race that is hyper close and teams of lawyers pouring in and not a standard structure that is dealing with this. One of the things that we're talking about as elections commissioners is having the state legislature give the state board of elections not just the funding, but the authority to mandate a standard process post-election. Right now, they just give guidance, and it's up to the commissioners to follow them. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. I do. I try to, anyways. But but again, if there was an authority, a mandate for the state board to do this, then it would be something that the staff at the state board could do and be ready. But I'll tell you this, anytime you have an election this close, no election is perfect. And anything that can go wrong is going to be hyper, you're going to be looking at it even closer, and it's going to get hyper centralized, and it's going to be, bigger than what it normally would. When I certify an election in Onondaga, there's always a handful of things that we find that we made mistakes in the first count. And that's why you go through the certification process to be able to fix those corrections. And that's why the results that come out on election night, and even after the absentee ballot opening, are unofficial until you go through that certification process. And that's why it takes 28 days after an election to do. One thing that will fix this in the future is that anytime there's a race this close from now on, we will have an automatic hand count of every ballot in a race. And this is a law that was passed this year. It's a law that Ulster County and New York City has had, where any race that is within 0.5% of a spread, you would then do an automatic hand recount of every ballot and be able to really ascertain the true vote of this race, outside of machines, and you would have a process in place. I'm a little surprised that process was not ordered in New York 22, and I guess I should say yet, because that process isn't done yet. That law goes into effect for next year's elections, and I really believe it's a good law. It's more resources that a board of elections has to do. Every year you're going to have a race or two that's going to be in this, but it is important to be able to rectify some of these situations. Look, we fill out little bubbles on a ballot and go through our machines. The machines are really accurate. They've shown to be really accurate, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. There's going to be a couple of things where a judge may be able to say, well, wait a minute, I can see a dot on there. The intent of the voter is clear. That should be counted. And that's why those hand counts are important. And I think it's going to be a good law that will fix some of this in the future.
I know, I know I didn't get to see the process play out in Onondaga County, but I sitting through, I sat through the Cuga side of the absentee count here in Cuga County with the 50th district, 50th Senate district, and then it brought back memories of the close race between Anne Marie Burkle and Dan Maffei 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now. So where I'm going with this is with that process, what can change with that? Because I know in your case it was that there were a couple complicating factors. You had a lot of ballots and a lot of challenges, and then COVID hit. Unfortunately, your office had to deal with that. So, but even without COVID, that process would have been drawn out a little bit. Certainly it probably would have taken weeks, not days, to complete that. So, what can change with that you balance, making sure the count is done, in a timely manner, but also any objections that are legitimate can be heard.
Well, there's three ways to combat this. The first way is to try to get as many ballots counted before election night as possible. And the way to do that is that to have a system in place that says that if an absentee ballot comes in, you don't have a right to go to the polls on election day. And so that'll allow the boards of elections either the day before the election or election day to open those ballots and scan them and count them in. Because nobody knows the results of the race, there won't be as many motives to challenge these ballots like they did in the post-election process, because to be quite honest, before those ballots are opened, nobody really knows how they're voting. And if you don't have an idea of whether you're up or down, you really don't have any real need or wish to be able to manipulate the process. That being said, we're always going to have some ballots that are counted after election day because we allow for ballots to be dropped off at the polling places on election day. We allow for ballots to be mailed in up to 7 days after election day. So there's always going to have to be a process for ballots that are received either on election day or after to be counted afterwards. And we really need to lean into the bipartisan nature of boards of elections and allow boards of elections to make final decisions on these ballots and not allow these frivolous challenges to come in. A lot of the challenges that we saw in New York 50 were quite honestly just frivolous challenges to signatures because somebody had a motive to say that that signature doesn't quite look like what they think the signature looks like. None of these people are handwriting experts. None of the, and they don't always have the right information in front of them. Or they were making ridiculous challenges like, a food stain on a ballot or they didn't like that we time-stamped in the ballots that were received on election day on the next day because they're under seal. And even though we provided proof of all of that, they were challenging all those in mass. Well, not in mass, only the Democratic ballots because there was the Republicans making the challenge. So, so we need to have better rules about what can be challenged and what the process is for challenging. There's a method called Smith v. King. It's named after the appellate case that dealt with a large amount of challenges. And what it does is basically says that the ballot counts, but a record is made if something challenges. And then they have 3 days to go to court to prove in front of a judge that this is not, that the Board of Elections made an error. And that would, if that was actually in law instead of a practice that certain courts have prescribed, then we would have that process in place during the challenge period. And again, we would know the voters' vote would count, and we would have we would have a system that would lean towards counting the vote instead of segregating the votes and then fighting it out in court like we're seeing in New York 22.
Wanted to close with this. Usually when we talk about legislation that's either passed or might be considered. As we get ready for the start of the 2021 state legislative session, what are you eyeing in hopes of the state legislature taking up this year in terms of election related legislation?
Well, two main things that I think will be passed on the first day of session is the constitutional amendments for same-day registration and no-fault absentees. And the second one is going to deal with this whole mail-in balloting problem because we're going to remove the excuse from the Constitution, which will allow us to design an absentee ballot counting system that happens before Election Day and quickly. There will be legislation to address that in 2021 as well. Now, remember, just because they pass these constitutional amendments, they have to be on the ballot before they become law. So, and that will happen in this year in 2021. So there will be some stopgap legislation to allow us to start counting some of these absentee ballots before Election Day this year in our current system. And we'll be looking at what the first big thing that I think the legislature needs to address is petitioning, because we're in this horrible pandemic. We're at the highest case numbers that we've ever seen, even at the height of the March pandemic, and it's going to get worse. We're in a very dark winter. And people are inside, and we still haven't shut down the state. And even if we do shut down the state, that creates obstacles for door-to-door petitioning. They have to fix that for 2021. And I think there's an opportunity to put in some pilots in place for ballot access in 2021 that may become permanent in future years. Things like county parties getting automatic ballot access and filing certificate of nominations and not having to do petitions. Allowing primary candidates or any candidate to do a filing fee that allows them to bypass the door-to-door petitioning and get on the ballot. These are things that we have to look at, because we can't have people going door to door in March when petitioning happens, and our whole political calendar means that we have to, by April 1st, have candidates on the ballot for the June primary. And I think we have to figure out a way to get that done.
Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner in Onondaga County. Dustin, Happy New Year to you. And, I'm sure we'll talk much more in 2021.
Happy New Year to you, Robert. And I got to say, you're the hardest working reporter out there. I see so many stories from you. I don't know if your family ever sees you, but I hope you spend a little bit of time with your family this holiday.
Just enough time. Yeah. Great. Thanks so much, Dustin.
Thank you.
I'm joined by Roger Misso, who wears a couple different hats. I'll let you, Roger, update folks on what you're up to these days. And so why don't we start there before we get into the topics of the day. Obviously, you ran for Congress. You were in the race for just about a year, up right before the Democratic primary there. So what have you been up to since then, since we last spoke, at least on this podcast, several months ago?
Well, my day job is to and first of all, Robert, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to speak with you. My day job, since I ended the campaign, really has been to fight like hell for veterans and military families. I'm the executive director of Taking the Hill. It's a federal political action committee. And, over the course of the last year, we endorsed and supported and tried to help elect about 35 candidates across the country for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate. So it's been very busy. I'm very proud of some of the things we've done. We helped get folks elected, helped start a conversation on, something that I struggled with when I was running, which is access to mental health care in public service and on political campaigns. So we were able to partner with some healthcare providers and really become the first political action committee in the country to work directly with providers and campaigns to at least provide access to care for candidates and staffs if they need it. So, always been a believer in the power of fitness. And this year has really, brought home to me the value of both physical and mental fitness. And just really glad to have the opportunity to do that kind of work on behalf of my, sister and brother veterans and their families across the country. So it's been fun. It's been a hell of a year. Looking forward to, turning the page on 2020, finally.
Yeah, you and about 7 billion others, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
To the, before I get into, why I brought you on to talk about the, your thoughts on the 2020 elections and, kind of the path forward, that mental health piece that you talked about, with candidates and campaigns, after elections, I've talked to several candidates over the years, and they talk about the grind, and it's long days. It's a long time span, obviously, being a candidate, especially a congressional candidate. I mean, you were in the race for a year, and that was still like 8 months out from the election. So,
that's right.
It's a long haul. So, why was that so important for you to focus on as an issue? Obviously, given your background in the military, but also that experience being a candidate.
I think it was just a unique, I had been a student of politics really my whole life. I was a political science major at the Naval Academy, went to the Harvard Kennedy School. Over the past decade and a half, I've been helping veterans and candidates in different capacities, either try to access their government, run for office, make the decision to launch a campaign. So I thought I knew, everything that went into a campaign, and, was certainly well informed enough to start my own. But there are a lot of intangibles that you don't really think about. And really the thing that I learned over the course of the campaign is I've talked a lot about how important fundraising is, how important reaching voters is for a campaign. But really what I've come to learn over the past 2 years is the most important, and it sounds silly, but the most important part of a campaign is the candidate's health, right? And that seems easy, but it is not, because there are so many different competing demands on your time, especially, if you have a family, if you have responsibilities. I was lucky, privileged to be able to be unemployed essentially for the year that I ran for office. But if you don't have that privilege, it's much more difficult. So that all weighs on you. And I've talked to, hundreds of veterans this year about, the psychological toll that having to ask somebody for money over and over and over again takes on you. And I was not prepared for that part of the campaign. And I've tried to be as open and honest about that and as public with that as possible, because, I think people ought to know. I think the more informed you are about what it takes to run for office, I feel like the better decision you can make for you and your family, the better representatives will get in that government. So obviously I was, dealing with a lot of things too. A recent transition from active duty in the Navy after 10 years. And that was something that, it's just impossible to know how you're going to deal with that. But, throw a congressional race on top of that. And, it takes time. And I've just been trying to give myself as much time as possible to, sort of rebalance myself in my life, and fortunate to have, again, the privilege and the space and the support structure with my wife and my kids to be able to do that. So definitely, if anybody, who's listening to this is looking for connections to mental health resources here locally, they should feel free to reach out to me or really anybody, because ending the stigma of accessing care and feeling like it makes you a weak person is just something that we need to end, right? Healing emotional and psychological wounds just as important as slapping a Band-Aid on or, healing physical wounds. And, it's something I'm pretty passionate about. And again, fortunate to have been able to focus on a little bit this year.
So let's talk about the 2020 elections, looking at this, just broadly, because certainly we can get into the national picture, what happened here in central New York, but what were your biggest takeaways from what we saw in the election results, this year?
I think it was kind of a mixed bag, right? And I don't think we really understand yet how to interpret these results in a really compelling way. I think there's a lot of shouting in the room that we're all in together. And this is the first election in pretty much anyone's lifetime that we have had a competitive presidential general election in the middle of a global pandemic. And, it was a challenge. So I'm glad that we got through it, that it was safe and people were able to cast their ballots, safely. I'm glad that various state governments, made the decision, given the pandemic, to make it easier for folks to access safe and legal ballots. But the results of the election, I think, were a mixed bag. I think first and foremost, important to recognize that Joe Biden won this election convincingly. It was, I don't want to say a landslide, but it was a major victory. Winning with the same electoral college margin, which will be voted on officially next week, that President Trump won by in 2016, getting more votes than any other presidential candidate in history, winning by more than 7 million votes in the popular vote. It was a convincing victory for Joe Biden. And that's certainly a testament to the groundswell of effort of the last 4 years to repudiate Donald Trump and Donald Trumpism. But the rest, I think, was a mixed bag. Obviously, my heart was broken that we couldn't get Dana Balter across the finish line here in New York 24. I wish I could have done more. I think has been my lesson in politics, is that you always feel that way. There's always one more dollar you could raise, another door that you could knock, phone call that you could make. But I thought Dana was a very good candidate and ran a strong campaign. But then we had John Mannion, winning in the Senate District 50, which was incredible. Re-electing Al Sturpey and Rachel May, another bright spot, and so many others. So we got Christy DeJoseph and Julie Serio on the Onondaga County Family Court bench, which is incredible as well. And a big shout out to the Board of Elections, Onondaga, Cayuga County, who dealt with what is undoubtedly the craziest, most intense election with so many different changes, in it, in at least recent memory, right? I don't want to say ever, but all props go out to, our commissioners, staffs. They've really shown us what it takes to secure free and fair elections in this country. They did a fantastic job. And I think that is, and I know we'll get down into each of these things, but leads me to the third point, which is folks' lack of understanding about the election system in this country, and sort of the fallout from the election, and some people's inability to accept the results of the election. I served as a ballot observer for the Mannion campaign, helping to make sure absentee ballots got counted after the election. But so many of the people that I hear making comments, whether it's social media or talking heads on the news, just haven't had that experience, right? They have no experience in the elections process, and just make these ridiculous, unfounded allegations about, legal votes. And I think any attempt to disenfranchise legitimate voters is unconstitutional and is about as un-American as it gets, and should be vociferously denounced by everybody. And I'm heartened that, obviously all Democrats and many Republicans have done it, but we clearly have an issue in this country with accepting the results of this past election.
As a not only that experience, but as a former candidate yourself, but also your certainly your career in the Navy, your service to this country. What's your reaction to these attacks on the voting process? You know, these claims with no evidence that there was voter fraud, and then obviously this week an effort by several Republican attorneys general. Notice attorneys general there. Shout out to the West Wing. Crowd will appreciate that.
Well done. Well done.
Their attempt, obviously, the goal of that lawsuit is to overturn the results of the election and have Donald Trump declared the victor. Just based on your personal experiences, how does that make you feel? What's your reaction to these attempts to really overturn the will of the people?
It's sad, Robert. It's just really sad. You know, I've certainly deployed to places or around places that don't have free and fair elections. And the historical examples from countries that President Trump would refer to as shitholes, who essentially do the exact thing that the Republican Party is trying to do, which is to discredit or through an extrajudicial process to get the courts to throw out the results of the election if it's a result they don't like. And we've seen this time and time again. It just has no business and no place in this country. It boggles the mind, really, to have to make these basic elemental arguments. And I think, we talk a lot about disinformation, and at the core of any disinformation campaign is a kernel of truth, right? And I think in a lot of allegations that we've seen, there's a little kernel of somebody made a mistake somewhere, because we forget that our election system is underpinned and administered by human beings who are not infallible, people, right? And sometimes somebody makes a mistake, but we have such robust systems to protect and to check the elections in our country that if somebody makes a mistake, there is a process in place to catch that mistake. And what Republicans, and I hate to be partisan on this, but it really just is the Republican Party making these allegations. What Republicans in these lawsuits are doing is to latch on to that human mistake, which has been corrected, by the way, or explained, and to say that, look, that means everything is fraudulent, which is on its face ridiculous. It's on its face ridiculous. And if you're a kid, I got 2 kids, right? My 3-year-old daughter, if she came to me with that logic, will get turned right back around on her, right? Like, nobody's passing first grade with that kind of logic system in place. We teach our kids to reason better than that. And we're now, apparently, this is the strategy for how Republicans want to, essentially take power and overturn the results of this election. And you get to the point where, you just sort of have to ask yourself, when is enough enough? Like, who steps up to be the bigger person and to get us back to the country that says, not everything is about this naked pursuit of power, and it has to get back to being what's in the best interests of the American people. It's the ultimate of ironies that this notion and this campaign built upon, America first and make America great again has perverted literally everything that this country was supposed to stand for, the Constitution itself. So it's just sad, and it makes me sad, and especially now, and something that we'll get into, I'm sure, later, because we can't reach out and touch people now in a pandemic, right? We can't have those face-to-face conversations with a lot of our family and friends to really talk this one out. And we're retreated behind these, partisan, divisive social media walls, which essentially, operate as echo chambers. It's just sad. And it's one of the reasons I, after a year-long campaign, knew that I couldn't just disengage and disappear to lick my wounds, that I had to stay engaged, because, we have to keep this conversation going in our community about what it really means, what America really is, right? And it is so much better than this Republican effort to overturn the will of the people. Luckily, the courts have slapped him down so far, but, enough here is enough.
How do you think we bridge that divide, just given, it seems like it's, there's more fuel on the fire because of what's happening in Georgia. There's 2 runoff elections there. And so it's kind of like the election season really didn't end. And many people view this as, certainly I think Donald Trump does in a way too, that it's something that, it's really viewed as a continuation of that election campaign, but also, really a key moment for, his presidential legacy to be able to hold on to those seats. So, after that, where do we go from here, you think? What's needed to bridge that divide and at least try to get some of these people who are convinced beyond a doubt that Donald Trump won the election. How do you overcome that?
Well, let me tell you, and at the end of this, you owe me $5 because I have the exact solution. I'm obviously kidding. Look, I think it gets down to, it's important to recognize that we have systemic issues in our political system that have existed for decades, centuries, really, that continue to plague us and continue to pit us against one another. And I think, how do we bridge that divide? In one word, I think it's trust, right? The issue with the result of the election is a lack of trust in the election system. The issue with, why certain segments of the country have ossified so hard against Democrats, whereas certain other segments of the country have ossified so hard against Republicans, is an issue of trust. And trust and bridging, the gap of trust in this country comes down to how do we communicate information. And I don't need to tell you, obviously in a local newsroom, we've seen what's happened to outlets like the Auburn Citizen, the Post-Standard or Syracuse.com now, outfits in Wayne County and Monroe County, all over upstate New York, that have disappeared. Newsrooms that were once bustling that, now are essentially ghost towns, right? Papers that disappear, not enough reporters to be there on the ground reporting on a lot of the issues. That takes its toll. I think that, combined with the fact that we continue to, and this is something I've said for the last 2 years on and off the campaign trail, we continue to elect the same kind of people. They tend to be wealthy and politically connected, and they tend not to have the experiences that folks, living on Main Street or, living in an agricultural, primarily rural community, they tend not to be those folks. But I think what we're seeing now is that there is a significant number of those kind of people in the country who do not believe that those in positions of political power are looking out for them. And it's why I think there are a lot of folks, particularly Democrats, who were so shocked by how close this election was in certain states, who just assumed that because Donald Trump is an immoral man, that he would be roundly rejected by voters by a significant margin, and he was not. But again, it's because it gets back to trust. And people have placed their trust in Donald Trump as a proxy, not because they're looking to him for moral absolution, but because he is different than, in their minds, he is different than the typical political class who shows up with a suit and a tie, speaks in press releases and clips on the news, and shows up with scissors to cut to cut tape in front of some business opening and tries to take credit for everything that happens in their lives. He was different. Now, if you really look through it, he descends from gold-plated escalators and also wears suits and was a terrible politician, but he understands and has understood, right, that he is now at the head of this sort of anti-government movement. He is the new head of it. It's always existed. It's always been out there, but he has been able to marshal it, I think, using, fears of using, racism, white supremacy, sexism, to really narrow and hone in on that audience and to turn them out and to make them feel like their lives are in danger when, I feel as a Democrat who ran for office this year, couldn't be further from the truth, right? I mean, I feel like we are gone from the days of believing that both parties generally wanted the same thing. They wanted the success and prosperity and good health of Americans. We just differed slightly on how we were going to get there, to now a political system where we believe that one party or one candidate or the other, their election means our destruction. And that is an untenable position. And I do not know where we go from there, except to say that we need to be doing all that we can to reach people. And if we don't have as many local news reporters and outlets, if social media has become the place where folks get information that is slanted and skewed and in many cases outright wrong and allows people to live in echo palace, the thing that we need to do, and which is unfortunately the thing we cannot do in this moment, is to knock on somebody's door, to reach people person to person, to get out from behind a mask. We can't do that right now because it's not safe, but it is what we need to do the minute it is safe to do so. It's a way that even you can't do from behind a telephone. That's obviously what a lot of Democratic campaigns this cycle did down ballot, which is instead of knocking doors, they did phone calls. And we knew there was probably going to be a price to that. I'm not saying that's why Democrats were less successful in some down ballot races, but there is a price to be paid when you cannot physically reach out and shake somebody's hand and look them in the eye and understand their full body language, and talk to them about your shared values and your vision for your community. So it's a long way of saying that we need to rebuild trust. That isn't just a vague concept, but it is shaking somebody's hand and looking them in the eye and getting back to this notion that, I was in the congressional race, obviously, to run against John Katko because I didn't think that he was an effective politician. I did not think and do not think that John Katko wants me and my family to fail or be destroyed. I just think he's an ineffective legislator who is not particularly good at his job. That's a healthy bound to be in, right? We need to get out of this notion that, just because we're different, we believe different political things, means that there's some sort of existential crisis. The existential crisis is in believing that both sides are destructive. So it's a long way of saying we need to rebuild trust, and we need to get back to seeing one another and speaking to one another again, and using social media for good and not for as a replacement for real engagement with our neighbors and friends and family.
Your talk of social media reminds me of an issue that you discussed a lot when you were a candidate, which was the need to address antitrust, revisit those laws, and it seemed like it was trending that maybe this would be an issue this year, but then of course the pandemic came around, and that really sucked a lot of the air out of the room, so to speak, because not that those issues weren't talked about, but certainly not as much as they were on track to be, because this was something that a lot of different candidates had talked about, including yourself. So where do you see that going as we go into 2021? new presidential administration. We'll see what the Senate looks like, and obviously Democrats won back the House, but where do you hope that lands as a priority for the next Congress and the Joe Biden administration?
Well, that's a great question. And I do think even in the pandemic year, this has been a good year for antitrust. And it's happened not in the way that I would have argued for, right? And you heard me say in the campaign trail that what, folks who believe in, equity and equality for all Americans have said for a long time, which is that concentrated power and concentrated wealth are the most corrupting influences in American society. And that is how antitrust law, in 1896 and since then came into existence. It's because we understood that if someone can take all the means of production and monopolize control of our economy, that's not good. That leads to massive inefficiency. It's a failure of our system of capitalism in the United States. And so we need to make these laws to make sure that, there is competition and there is freedom of choice and free markets. The way that antitrust, there's suits right now federally and among states being brought up against Google and most recently Facebook, which is good news. It has come though, the thing that pushed it over the edge wasn't necessarily that Republicans started believing the Democratic argument or the progressive argument on, why we should break up big tech because of concentrated wealth and concentrated power, but because of, again, one of these boogeymen out there about, Facebook and Twitter and these other outlets limiting conservative speech, which is, hey, whatever it takes to get them there. And I think Republicans have finally seen that, oh yeah, these guys do have a lot of power, and that's probably not a really good thing for our country. And so I'm looking forward to this next year of those fights being played out. It remains to be seen. Obviously, we don't have an attorney general candidate yet. We don't have, an FCC or an FTC commissioner yet. So we don't really know what signal the Biden administration is going to send. But we have seen in the last couple of years just an explosion in growth of groups like the Open Markets Institute, the American Economic Liberties Project, and a lot of others who are dedicated and focused on taking this work from what has largely been, I think, almost purely academic pursuit and translating it into something that has movement and political power behind it. That I think is what we have to look forward to in 2021 and 2022, is how we take it from textbooks and JSTOR and get it to somebody running for town board or U.S. Congress, right? Because this issue does impact us here, right? When, as something else I've talked about, which is it's not Ryan McMahon or Ben Walsh's fault that Amazon gets to come to, DeWitt or to Clay and get massive tax breaks from Onondaga County taxpayers. We shouldn't necessarily oppose them because of this deal, but we should oppose a system that results in an economic race to the bottom that sees a corporation like Amazon, the wealthiest in the world, one of the wealthiest in the world, that pays $0 in taxes every year. But why should we give them a tax break? Well, quasi-monopolies like Amazon have created this economic race to the bottom where they pit our different state and local tax laws against one another, and they make us extort one another. It's not healthy for anybody, but there are a lot of issues, and I think the fight against concentrated wealth and concentrated power isn't going away. Certainly, it funds certain political campaigns for some folks who are more than happy to cash the checks of large corporations and wealthy individuals and vote in Congress accordingly. That's something that we need to, and I will continue to bring to the light. Anytime that a development company gives a max political donation to, or gives it, millions of dollars to a super PAC without having to disclose their identity in order to lobby for some development in central New York or some obscure regulation change that's going to make them millions of dollars. That's the kind of stuff that we need people to continue to bring to the light and to communicate to people. Because I think if there is one thing, in addition to rebuilding trust, that is going to bring us back to greater national political balance, obviously in addition to trust, it is going to be getting us out of this left versus right frame and towards an understanding that the real movement needs to be between up and down, between the few at the top and the rest of us who are somewhere near the bottom. Because the few at the top have all of the levers of power, and they are more than happy to use them as leverage to increase their profits, to buy their 7th or 8th private jet, while the rest of us are fighting over whether our stimulus checks in the middle of a historic global pandemic should be $600 instead of $1,200. Just ridiculousness. So I'm looking forward to the year ahead. I will remain engaged with the work in some capacity. I don't know what it will be. But this is an important fight that I think transcends politics and is really one that cuts and lands right on the kitchen table for a lot of folks.
Close with a couple of questions, a couple of final questions for you. One is, now that you've been a former candidate for 9 months, I'm curious how you look back on that experience and how it may have changed your view of politics. Certainly you had a view of the political system going into it as a candidate. How did that change, if at all, after that experience? And how do you, now that you've been separated from it from a decent chunk of time? I mean, 9 months in a pandemic is like 9 years. So how do you look back on that experience, and how do you think it helped you in terms of that experience and going forward?
It really galvanized for me the notion that it takes a village. I think there are some people for whom the decision to run for office or to seek a career or something in politics comes a little easier, right? I think that is a privilege in and of itself. And my sense is, and having been around central New York, Cayuga County, Onondaga County, everywhere, folks are kind of tired of that. And they sense that it hasn't been working for us politically, right? So I think, I remain committed to the notion that we need to change the kind of people who run for office. But what my work with veterans and military families this year since the campaign has taught me is that it takes a village, right? You need help, you need support networks. So I was very happy, this week to be a part of a candidate training program for those in Onondaga County who want to run for office in 2021 and 2022. There were 80 people on the call, 80 people. That is more people than I've ever seen on any candidate training program. And these are people who are going to run for town board, who are going to run for mayor, for county legislator, for county executive, for Congress, for the U.S. Senate, right? We need to get back to that notion of helping one another out. Because I think we've gotten into this false sense that, well, our candidates should be infallible and should have all the answers. And I think the reality is that is just, that is not a healthy expectation. That we have to remember that we're all human beings and that we're all good at some things and not good at others. And we need those around us who can help us bridge those gaps. So, I'm proud to continue to be a part of those efforts to help other people succeed in public office, especially, here in Syracuse, Black and brown candidates who are significantly underrepresented, not just in public office, but in our party establishment. Need to continue to lift those people up and to make our communities representation look more like the places that they're supposed to represent and the people they're supposed to represent. So the one, I think, overarching thing has been that, political access and political connections is a form of privilege. And if you don't have it, you don't really you start off at a disadvantage, really. You do. And you can make it up. But, what has been, the most exciting part of this year for me has been helping people make up that gap, helping them raise that extra, $1,000, helping them when times get really tough and you want to give up, giving them that pep talk and making them believe that they can do it. And, also at the end of the day, in elections, there's going to be one winner and at least one loser. And, I've been involved in helping people run for office for a little while. Nobody really likes to talk about what it feels like to lose an election. But I think if we did more of that, more people would have the courage to step up and to run, the kind of people that we need to step up and run, because they would feel like, and they would know that there's a process and there are people here at the end where if I'm not successful are going to be there for me to help pick me up. So I've been blessed to have been around those people this year, and look forward to being that person for those people throughout the future.
And then lastly for you, is being a candidate something that you're interested in doing again? I'm not going to name any sort of years. Just throwing the question out there broadly, is it something that, based on your experience, you have a desire to say, you know what, down the road, whether it's in a year or 10 years, this is something that I'm interested in doing again?
I could give you a political answer, but I will give you a one-word answer, and then I'll tell you a story that sort of explains my thinking here. The answer to your question is yes. It has no time. I don't know if it's 2021 or 22 or 2075, right? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is this, something that I believe fundamentally to my core, is this story about famous Air Force fighter pilot named John Boyd, who ended up getting out of the military as an 06 after having revolutionized, basic fighter pilot, modern fighter pilot tactics were developed by this guy. We still use him today, and he existed, made him 40, 50 years ago. He would say, I think you may have heard this story before, Robert, but he'd have young fighter pilots come to him, looking for mentorship, looking for advice. And they would ask, what should I do? Should I take this road or take this path or take this job? And he would say that the question that's constantly before us in life is, do you want to be someone or do you want to do something? And there are a lot of people in the world, Robert, who want desperately to be someone. They want to be, and in politics, they want to be a candidate or they want to be an elected official. I am not that person. I am someone who really wants to do something. There are a lot of problems here in Central New York, a lot that I care deeply and passionately about. I have 2 kids, so anything that relates to their education, the safety of their streets, the prosperity of the city that they live in now and the surrounding communities matters a lot to me. The fact that concentrated wealth and power still, after 2.5 centuries of this country, plague our political system, it matters greatly to me. My goal this year, next year, and every year after that is to do something about it. There comes a time when I feel like the thing to do is to be a candidate again and to run for public office, and I will absolutely do that if it's the right thing to do. But it will be in the service of doing something to improve the lives of people here or around the country. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Great. Roger Misso, thanks so much for joining me again on the podcast. You've been on multiple times. I can't say you're the
what am I, the Ben Affleck of the podcast here? That's exciting. Or Matt Damon, whoever, I don't know.
It's almost like SNL. They have I forget what they give people who have hosted the show 5 or more times. There's some club, so to speak, but it's getting to that point for you with the eye.
The Alec Baldwin here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
hey, let me just say too that I appreciate you. This year, you're reporting, having to experience being furloughed, having to experience being a local reporter in the middle of a pandemic. You have done this region, this state, I think, proud. We're lucky to have you here in Auburn, Cayuga County. And it's been a privilege to get to know you and hope to continue to speak with you in the years to come.
We'll close it up there. Roger, thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you.